first 30 years 1947 to 1977. The early years after independence is arguably the defining period in India's post-independent history. The main challenges before the leadership was the need to maintain unity and integrity, bring about a social and economic transformation, and to ensure the working of the democratic system. These challenges are interrelated and great care had to be taken to ensure that system did not get imbalanced. In this chapter, we will examine three interrelated issues, including how the constitution and the democracy worked and how India resolved some key issues of nation building. First general elections. The first general elections to be held under the new constitution were immensely significant for Indian democracy. It represented India's determination to take path of democracy after independence from the British rule. An election commission was set up to take care of the practical matters of conducting elections across the length and the breadth of the country. To overcome the problem of illiteracy, the Election Commission came up with the novel idea of having symbols from everyday life to represent political parties and candidates. This basic idea continues even today to make even easier in the elections, and each candidate had a separate ballot box with a separate stuck outside. The voter had only to drop their ballot paper in the box of their preferred candidate. In the run up to the elections, there was a massive campaign to encourage the voters to go out and vote. One party dominance in political system. In independent India's first three general elections in 1952 to 57 and 1962, the Indian National Congress won, reducing other participants to almost nothing. Jawaharlal Nehru became the first Prime Minister of India. The Congress won over 70% of the seats by obtaining about 45% of the total voters cast. No other party was anywhere near to the Congress. The Congress party formed the government in many of the states as well as this inaugurated what some observers call the Congress system. However, the Congress always had within it smaller groups, though these groups originated on the basis of personal competition between leaders. The groups took different positions on various issues depending on the interest of the members. This made the Congress appear as if it was the party representing diverse interests and positions. Political competition in India, one party dominant system, therefore took place with the Congress. The opposition parties therefore only posed a talent and not a real threat. It was therefore not an undemocratic situation marked by the absence of other political parties. The other political parties gradually built themselves within a couple of decades, became strong contenders of the power. This period, or to a large extent, helped the nurture democracy in its early years, allowing the establishment of the multi-party system based on free and open competition. Demand for state reorganization. Among the first challenges new nation faced was the demand for reorganization of states on the basis of language. A large part of the country was under the princely states. In each of these, people speaking many different languages were living together. All people speaking a language and living in contiguous areas demanded to be organized under one state. Will agreeing to these demands help to build the unity of the country, or will it lead to the breaking of the country along linguistic lines was the main concern. The partition of the country on the basis of the religion had created doubts and fears about the security and stability of India in the minds of the leadership. There was the fear that language reorganization would lead to breakup of the country. The most vigorous of all the movements was that the Telugu speakers called upon a Congress to implement the old resolutions in favor of linguistic states. The methods used included petitions, representations, street marches, and fast. Jawaharlal Nehru was not opposed to linguistic states. He only believed that this was not the time for it. It was also consensual position among the leaders of the day. They believed that India was the process of consolidating itself and there should be no distraction. State Reorganization Act 1956, Potti Sri Ramalu demanding the formation of a separate Telugu-speaking state died after 58 days of fasting in October 1952. Consequently, the state of Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu were created. In August 1953, the States Reorganization Commission was appointed. On the basis of its report in 1956, the State Reorganization Act was passed in the Parliament. This led to the creation of 14 states and 6 union territories. The creation of linguistic states was an example of how popular will trumpet and also showed how politics resolved a problem. Looking back today, linguistic reorganization actually helped consolidated India and did not necessarily weaken India as expected. Social and economic change. The Constituent Assembly had called for social, economic, and political justice and equality of status and opportunity. It put social and economic change at the top of the agenda of the modern India. The Planning Commission was set up with a month of the inauguration of the new constitution. The first 5-year plan focused on agriculture and stressed to the end for increasing the food production, development of transportation and communications, and the provision of social services. It also stressed the need to industrialize India as quickly as possible. For Nehru, agricultural transformation was not simply an economic issue, but a political, social, and economic transformation of the rural sector. The strategy favored by Nehru and finally adopted included 3 components: land forms, agriculture, cooperatives, and local self-governments. 3 types of land reforms were contemplated: abolition of zamindari system, tenancy reform, and land ceilings. The primary aim of these were to ensure that the land went to the hands of the actual tiller, and this was to be incentive for them to produce more. Land reforms were implemented in the half-hearted manner across India. While zamindari system was abolished, redistribution of land to the landless did not take place. The Dalits continued to be landless but benefited from the abolition of forced labor and abolition of untouchability. The first 5-year plan focused on improving agriculture and building large dams to irrigate and produce electricity. The planner felt that for the country to develop, it was essential to develop the industries so that more people can shift to towns to work in factories and in the service sector. Hence, the second 5-year plan onwards emphasizes shifted to industries. Foreign policy and wars. When India became independent, the Cold War had just begun and the world was being polarized into the countries in the US and USSR camp. Jawaharlal Nehru followed a policy of not joining either camp and tried to maintain an equidistant and independent position in foreign policy. He also joined hands with several other countries that had become independent around the same time and wanted to follow a similar policy: Indonesia, Egypt, Yugoslavia, and so on. Together, they built the non-aligned movement. As for the immediate neighbors, he formulated the Panchashil policy of non-interferences in each other's internal affairs. However, India had to face two wars during this period, first with Pakistan over Kashmir in 1948 and with China in 1962. India was not well prepared for the wars, especially the war in 1962, and sustained heavy losses of human life and money. The succession. With the death of Nehru in 1964, critics raised doubts as to whether democracy itself would survive or would it, like other countries, lose its democratic ethos. The Congress, however, managed a successful transition with both the choosing of Lal Bahadur Shastri as its leader in government. Shastri was immediately put to a test with a series of issues which challenged the fundamental values and goals of the Indian nation. These included the anti-Hindi agitation led by the DMK in the south, which threatened the goals of the unity and integrity, the shortage of food which came in the way of social and economic transformation, anti-Hindi agitation. When the Official Language Act was passed in 1963, the DMK believed it was an attempt to foist Hindi onto the rest of the country, and they began to statewide campaign protesting the imposition of Hindi. These included strikes, dharnas, and hattals, burning effigies, Hindi books, as well as the pages of the Constitution. The central government had soon taken note of these protests. The Congress itself was divided between pro-Hindi and anti-Hindi campaigns. Finally, when things seemed to be going out of the hand, Shastri, though the support of pro-Hindi stand, made series of concessions to assuage the feeling of the anti-Hindi campaign. These included, among others, the right of each state to have a language of its own, which could be the regional language or English. Communication could be in regional languages with English translations. English would continue to be the communication language between the center and the states, and that the civil services exams would be conducted in English rather than Hindi alone. Green Revolution. The debate regarding the developmental strategy was not simply an account one but also had political implications. While Nehru and the left of the center group within the Congress favored the state controlled and institutional strategy in agriculture. There was a right of center faction which was opposed to state control. Once it became clear that the existing strategy was not increasing food production, there was a shift of different strategies between the years 1964 to 67. This attempt to secure cooperation of the state governments as well as increase food production. Rise of regional parties and regional movements. In 1967, election was a landmark election in the history of India. It showed that elections had come to be taken very seriously and had a life to their own. The Congress party suffered its worst defeat till then. It was the return with the lowest majority it had since independence, 284 seats. It was defeated in assemblies also. The defeated party did not trying to cling to power but allowed to victors to form government. This showed that the democracy had taken roots in India and country was moving towards a competitive multi-party system. The prominent losses for the Congress included Tamil Nadu and Kerala. In Tamil Nadu, the DMK won a huge margin. It also showed that strongly organized regional movements could challenge the dominant party. The Congress also lost its neighboring Kerala as also the West Bengal and Orissa. These defeats and challenges also weakened the Congress internally. Consequently, the Congress governments felt they were replaced by Samyukta Vidyak Dal governments. These were basically the coalition of legislators against the Congress, made up Jan Sangh Socialists, Swatantra and Congress defectors besides local parties. The new governments are an important maker in India's political history because it was in a way the first democratic surge. Many of these SVD government were short-lived. Their life was marked by defections and corruption. Power seemed to be the only thing that united them. These governments had nothing to showcase. However, the problem is that even today, the regional or state parties are evaluated from this standpoint. This period saw a renewal of a regional sentiment in different parts of the country. In Andhra Pradesh, there was a demand for the separation of Telangana. In Assam, a new state called Meghalaya was created in December 1969 out of the tribal districts of Khasi, Jaintia and Garo Hills. Punjab, despite being formed in 1966, did not have a capital of its own. During the period 1968 to 69, there were the series of demonstrations asking for Chandigarh, which served as a common capital of Haryana and Punjab, to be given to them. In Maharashtra, there was a curious demand of Bombay for Maharashtrians only. At the same time, during this period, old demands also continued. The Kashmir and the Nagaland demands also came up during this period. This was also period of communal tension. There were riots in different parts of the country. Indira Gandhi took up the challenge both from within her party as well as those outside by taking a sharper turn in the post of 1967 elections. She attempted to create new social base of her own and for her party by identifying with the poor and the downtrodden. All promises of social and economic development were yet to be fulfilled, yet Indira was making new promises. Less than the decade later, the lack of fulfillment of rising mass expectations created frustrations and disheartenment and culminated with the position of emergency. Bangladesh Wars. In the year 1970s, trouble was brewing in East Pakistan as a movement for the erosion of Bengali identity and protest against the what was seen as a step motherly treatment by West Pakistan. A period of military repression of East Pakistan began. Lakhs of refugees streamed to India, which had to feed and house them. Meanwhile, a liberation movement started in Bangladesh and India was asked to assist in it. In 1971, a war broke out between India and Pakistan, and India decisively intervened to ensure the liberation of Bangladesh and its establishment as an independent country. The left turn, Indira Gandhi charted a new path for the Congress and herself by introducing new policies and programs. Immediately after the victory in the war, using a popular slogan, Garibi Hatao, the Congress won with a record margin in 1971 general elections. The opposition was declined, decimated. Her critics were silenced and she became the darling of the masses. She now had to control over both the party as well as the parliament. Another among the important legislations that were passed during this period to achieve goal of social and economic transformation were the nationalization of many private banks and abolishing of princely pensions. Both of these legislations were challenged in the courts. The Supreme Court was afraid that the Constitution was being amended rapidly in the name of achieving social and economic change was actually disfiguring it and unbalancing the existing relations between the different institutional structures. In 1973, the court came up with the landmark decision on the basic structure of the constitution, which put a check on the government power to amend the constitution. Events beyond her control put Indira Gandhi a spot and made it difficult for her to fulfill all her promises. In 1973, Arab-Israel war raised oil prices to an all-time high and put huge pressure on the government. Inflation and the rise in the prices of essential items, scarcity of food, and also unemployment began to have an effect. The opposition united under the Jayaprakash Narayan run series of campaigns in different parts of the country against the Congress and especially Indira. Emergency. The government reacted harshly with a series of laws which violated civil rights in the name of maintaining order. Meanwhile, due to a decision of Allahabad High Court, Indira Gandhi was unseated from Lok Sabha for violating some of the provisions of the Representation of the People Act during 1971 elections. However, she got a stay from the Supreme Court. A few days later, with the JP movement gaining most strength, the government imposed emergency and justified it as necessary to preserve order, save democracy, and protect the social and economic transformation and preserve national integrity. With this, democracy was put on hold. Many of the fundamental rights were suspended. There were also instances of arbitrary detentions, torture, and other violations of civil liberties. However, in the absence of civic freedom, people could not express their discontent, and the government therefore could not take corrective measures. The major highlight of this period was the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, which brought about a series of changes. It had the following aims: excluding the courts from election disputes, strengthening the central government, the state governments providing maximum protection from judicial challenges to social and economic transformation, legislation making the judiciary subservient to parliament. Summing up, though the first 30 years ended with emergency, if a balance sheet were to be drawn, there would be more credits than debits. The most important achievement of this period was the establishment of a stable democracy. The gradual emergence of a competitive multi-party system with parties representing diverse interests was a real achievement if one were to compare India with other countries that got independence around the same time. India also set up an impressive institutional framework with independent institutions like the judiciary, election commission, control and auditor general, and so on. India has been extremely successful in holding together and maintaining its unity and integrity. In terms of economic goals, the setting up of planning commission and the aim of balanced regional development noteworthy from the state of dependency for food. India gradually became self-sufficient in food production. However, balanced regional development did not take place and some regions developed better than others. One of the greatest weaknesses was undoubtedly the low priority given to the primary education and public health, while the more effects of the caste system like untouchability were removed. There still remained a large amount of discrimination. Gender discrimination continued.
మా వీడియో గనుక మీకు నచ్చినట్లయితే లైక్ చేయండి, షేర్ చేయండి. ఇలాంటి మరిన్ని వీడియోస్ కోసం మా ఛానల్ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోవడం మాత్రం మర్చిపోకండి. థ్యాంక్ యూ ఫర్ వాచింగ్.